Sunday, May 23, 1982, two roommates, 21-year-old Lori Lister and 18-year-old Melinda Aguilar, experienced a terrifying attack in their Houston, Texas apartment. A man seemed to target them with the clear intention of killing them. He tied them up and tried to drown Lori in their apartment bathtub. However, Melinda successfully escaped by pretending to faint and then jumping head first off her balcony. She sought help, and with the assistance of a neighbor, both herself and her roommate were saved. The culprit, 28-year-old Coral Watts, was arrested as he attempted to escape. What no one could have expected was that he was not only involved in just these two attempted murders, but was also suspected to have killed close to 100 other women. He confessed to killing 13 women and received a 60-year sentence in 1982. Then, in a shocking twist, in the early 2000s, this man, who had committed numerous murders, was on the verge of being set free from jail. This was because of a controversial legal ruling that changed his classification to a nonviolent felon. Surprisingly, under Texas law, well-behaved nonviolent felons could deduct 3 days from their sentence for every 1 day served. Watts, a model prisoner, had enough time deducted to potentially be released as early as May 9, 2006. The police, victims' families, and the public were left in utter shock and fear. The lingering questions haunted everyone. Why, against all reason, how could the killer be released? Can there be any conceivable justification for setting free a serial killer responsible for a multitude of deaths? Carl Eugene Watts, known by his nickname Coral, was born on November 7, 1953 in Killeen, Texas, to Richard Eugene Watts and Dorothy Mae Young. His father served as a private first class in the Army while his mother worked as a kindergarten art teacher. Before Watts turned 2, his parents separated, and after this, he was raised by his mother. They relocated to Inkster, Michigan, and in 1962, Dorothy Mae married a mechanic named Norman Caesar, with whom she had 2 daughters. When he was 8 years old, Watts and his sister battled meningitis. The illness nearly claimed his life, leading him to be held back in school an extra year and causing him to miss the 3rd grade. Herman Kiefer Hospital became Watts' temporary home, where he underwent spinal taps and had to be isolated from other patients. Reports from journalists suggested that Watts' body temperature reached alarming levels, raising concerns about potential brain damage. Following his illness, his family noticed a transformation in his personality. He became bashful, quiet, and introverted, with a compromised attention span and a deteriorating memory. Struggling to keep up academically due to being held back a grade and suffering from chronic sleeplessness, Watts began having violent dreams about combating and killing malevolent spirits of women, and these disrupted his sleep cycle. When later questioned about his crimes and why he killed his victims, he explained that he wanted to free their spirits because they possessed evil eyes. At the age of 12, Watts began to relish his sleep-induced fantasies of torturing and killing girls and young women. This was when Watts, who was a teenager, started stalking girls, and it's thought he might have killed his first victim before the age of 15. At 15, Watts was identified by the police as the assailant in the attack on 26-year-old Joan Gave that occurred on July 29, 1969. During his newspaper delivery route, Watts knocked on Joan's apartment door and violently assaulted her when she opened it. Without showing any remorse, he continued with his delivery route as if nothing had transpired. Joan contacted the authorities and promptly reported the incident, leading to Coral's arrest at his home. Subsequently, he was mandated to undergo psychiatric treatment at the Lafayette Clinic in Detroit, a mental hospital. A psychiatric evaluation revealed mild intellectual disability with a full-scale IQ of 75 and a delusional thought process. Despite his poor academic performance, a police officer later described him as very, very intelligent with an excellent memory. Watts was released from the Lafayette Clinic on November 7, 1969. Despite academic struggles, Watts graduated from high school in 1973 and earned a football scholarship to Lane College in Jackson, Tennessee. However, he was expelled after 3 months due to allegations of stalking and assaulting women. Additionally, suspicions surrounded Watts in the cruel murder of a female student, contributing to his expulsion, although insufficient evidence prevented a conviction. Following his expulsion, he relocated to Houston, Texas. In 1979, Coral and Dolores Howard, his girlfriend, welcomed their daughter, Nikesha Watts. However, shortly after her birth, Coral and Dolores ended their relationship and went their separate ways. Coral then entered into a marriage with Valeria Goodwill. Shortly after their union, Valeria noticed Coral exhibiting peculiar behavior. He constantly rearranged the furniture, used knives to chop up houseplants, broke candles, melted them onto a table, and scattered trash around the floors without bothering to clean it up. Additionally, after moments of intimacy, he would abruptly leave, disappearing for several hours. Unfortunately, their marriage only lasted 6 months. Watts' murders officially began when he was 20 years old in 1974, though there are suspicions he may have had more victims prior to this as well. He kidnapped his victims from their homes, subjected them to torture, and ultimately took their lives. Striking in various states, his victims were primarily thin, attractive white women who were between the ages of 14 and 44. Watts used different methods to murder his victims, including strangulation, stabbing, bludgeoning, and drowning. At 10:45 a.m. on October 25, 1974, Coral knocked on 23-year-old Lenore Nizaki's apartment door. Claiming to be looking for Charles, the name of one of his siblings, he engaged Lenore in conversation. When she opened the door with the chain still secured, Coral asked if he could leave a note. As she went to fetch paper, he suddenly attacked Nizaki and choked her into unconsciousness. Although Lenore later alerted police, they were unable to locate her assailant. 5 days later, on October 30th, 1974, Watts tortured and ruthlessly killed 20-year-old Gloria Steele, believed to be his second victim. A student at Western Michigan University, Gloria was also a mother. She was found with a crushed windpipe and 33 stab wounds to her chest, inflicted by a wooden carving instrument. He didn't face a direct murder charge due to a lack of solid evidence. The only witness, Diane K. Williams, an apartment resident manager, observed a black man searching for Charles around the apartment complex. Upon seeing Williams, Coral seized her, forced her door open, and dragged her inside. During their struggle, Williams' phone rang, prompting her to knock it off the hook and scream for help. As her attacker fled, Williams saw him getting into a tan Pontiac Grand Prix. In a police lineup, both Williams and Nizaki identified Coral, who had been apprehended for stealing plywood from the Western Michigan University campus. For the Nizaki and Williams cases, he was taken into custody and charged with assault and battery on November 16, 1974. After being diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder and attempting to take his own life with a length of cord at the Kalamazoo Mental Hospital, Watts was relocated to the Center for Forensic Psychiatry in Michigan. When questioned about the death of Gloria Steele in 1975, he admitted being nearby the day before Gloria died. However, he denied being responsible for her death, despite confessing to attacking approximately 15 other young women. A search at Watts' residence by Detroit police, conducted under a search warrant, revealed a wooden carving tool, but no evidence linking him to Gloria's death. During his trial for the assault and battery of Nizaki and Williams, Watts entered a no-contest plea and was subsequently sentenced to a year in the county jail. Psychologists evaluating him characterized Watts as extremely hazardous, lacking remorse for his crimes, reckless, careless, and emotionally distant, with a high likelihood of relapsing. After that, a series of attacks occurred in the Detroit region over the span of a year where he claimed the lives of 5 women. One peculiar discovery was that the majority of his crimes happened on Sunday mornings. This odd pattern earned the perpetrator the ominous nickname Sunday Morning Slasher from Ann Arbor newspaper, heightening the mystery surrounding the timing of these horrifying attacks, all occurring at around 4 a.m. In 1980, Shirley Small, a 17-year-old from Ann Arbor, Michigan, was fatally stabbed twice outside her home on April 20th. A similar attack targeted Glenda Richmond, 26, on July 13, 1980. Both cases lacked sufficient evidence for conviction, but exhibited Watts' characteristics. The first homicide directly attributed to Coral occurred on September 14, 1980, when 20-year-old graduate student Rebecca Huff was found dead, having endured around 50 stab wounds. A 20-year-old named Delpy survived an attack on October 6, 1980, but suffered severe consequences, including partial paralysis and muscle weakness. On November 1st, 1980, a 30-year-old woman, Agnes, narrowly escaped an attack by a hooded man resembling Watts after raising the alarm while returning from a Halloween party. Although she identified Watts from photos, the dimly lit surroundings left some uncertainty. In July 1980, local homicide investigators turned their attention to Watts, prompting the formation of a task force to delve into the Sunday slashings. Watts came under sporadic surveillance, and in November, a court order allowed officers to install a tracking device on his car. On November 15, 1980, around 5 in the morning, 2 patrol officers near Main Street in Ann Arbor observed a suspicious man in a car following a woman walking home. Realizing she was being tailed, the woman sought refuge in a doorway in an attempt to elude her pursuer. Coral, frustrated by losing track of the woman, was apprehended by the police when they pulled over his car for outdated license plates and driving with a suspended license. During the inspection of his vehicle, authorities found a package containing wood-filling equipment and a few screwdrivers. Their most significant discovery was a dictionary belonging to Rebecca Hoff, bearing the carved phrase, "Rebecca is a lover." However, it proved insufficient evidence to link him directly to her murder. In the spring of 1981, Coral relocated to Columbus, Texas, and secured employment with an oil firm. During the weekends, he would travel over 70 miles to his next hunting ground in the Houston region. Between 1974 and 1982, Watts committed murders of numerous women, totaling dozens. Despite the extensive list of victims, Watts managed to evade detection as a serial killer for nearly 8 years. Several factors contributed to this elusiveness. Watts operated across various jurisdictions and even different states, complicating the task of connecting the crimes. Additionally, his modus operandi diverged from typical patterns as he never engaged in physical intimacy with his victims, unlike many other serial killers targeting women and girls. Consequently, even with the emergence of DNA testing, linking the crimes proved challenging. Furthermore, Watts was not considered a suspect by those who knew him, and law enforcement did not identify him as a potential perpetrator until his arrest in 1982. On May 23, 1982, Melinda Aguilar, 18, and Lori Lister, 21, experienced a break-in at their Houston apartment by Watts. When Lori came back from work, Watts choked her down the steps outside the apartment. Subsequently, he entered the apartment and began strangling Melinda. Pretending to be unconscious, Melinda managed to escape being strangled completely. Watts wire-tied her hands behind her back with the intent to drown Lori. He carried Lori's body upstairs to the bathroom, filling the bathtub with water. However, Melinda seized the opportunity and leapt out of the window to seek help. Lori was saved and Watts was apprehended after he initially tried evading capture. While he was in custody, investigators started linking him to recent killings of women. Despite the connections, Texas prosecutors believed there was insufficient evidence to secure a murder conviction against Watts. In May 1982, following the attacks on Melinda Aguilar and Lori Lister, Harris County Assistant District Attorney Ira Jones negotiated a plea bargain. Watts would admit fully to his crimes, receiving immunity from murder prosecution in exchange for a charge of burglary with intent to murder. He agreed to a 60-year sentence for this offense. Watts accepted the deal, leading detectives to the graves of 3 victims. Finally, Watts confessed to attacking 19 women, resulting in the murder of 13. He admitted to killing some victims but also refrained from confessing to the deaths of a few. However, Michigan authorities declined to participate in the deal, leaving his cases in that state open. However, the hope for justice took a devastating turn when, shortly into his prison term, the Texas Court of Appeals ruled that Watts had not been informed that the bathtub and water he used in the attempt to drown Lori Lister were considered deadly weapons. This decision reclassified him as a nonviolent felon and eventually opened the door to early release. This was because Texas law at the time granted nonviolent felons 3 days deducted from their sentences for every 1 day served with good behavior. Watts, a model prisoner, accumulated time deductions that could have seen him released as early as May 9, 2006. The subsequent abolishment of the early release law, prompted by public outcry, brought little solace as it couldn't be retroactively applied as dictated by the Texas Constitution. In 2004, a plea for justice echoed across the nation as Michigan Attorney General Mike Cox sought information to convict Watts of murder and prevent his potential release. Joseph Foy from Westland, Michigan, bravely stepped forward, recounting the chilling sight of a man resembling Watts murdering 36-year-old Helen Dutcher on December 1, 1979. Helen had succumbed to 12 stab wounds. Foy identified Watts by his eyes, hauntingly describing them as evil and devoid of emotion. Despite Watts' immunity from prosecution for the 13 confessed killings in Texas, Michigan held no such agreement. As the 2004 trial approached, law enforcement officials implored the trial judge to allow the Texas confessions into evidence, a plea he accepted. Watts faced conviction for the murders of Helen Dutcher and Gloria Steele and received 2 life sentences without parole in a Michigan prison on November 17, 2004. He was sentenced to serve his time in a maximum security prison in Ionia, Michigan. However, he passed away from prostate cancer a few years after the sentence began on September 21, 2007 in a hospital in Jackson, Michigan. In the end, he escaped once again from serving his full sentence for the lives he took, leaving a somber end to his dark tale. Coral Eugene Watts, a malevolent serial killer, terrorized the country with his many killings. Despite confessions, legal loopholes allowed him to reduce his sentence and almost led to his release. His later conviction for the 1979 murder of Helen Dutcher exposed the depths of his darkness. Watts, a chilling reminder of hidden evil, left the Ann Arbor murders unsolved, casting a haunting shadow on his legacy. On the evening of September 28, 2017, Nikki Adamando, a 27-year-old woman, carried a heavy burden in her heart. In a moment of desperation to protect herself and her children, Nikki made a drastic decision and confessed to shooting her boyfriend, Chris Grover, who had subjected her to consistent abuse and threats. The shocking news sent shockwaves through their community, as nobody could have anticipated such a tragic outcome. For years, Nikki had silently endured the abuse inflicted upon her by Chris, with visible bruises and burn marks serving as painful reminders of her suffering. Despite seeking solace from friends, therapists, and colleagues, she hesitated to involve the authorities, fearing the potential loss of her children. Now, as a clear victim of domestic violence, Nikki finds herself entangled in a complex battle to convince investigators that her actions were in self-defense. Following her arrest, numerous individuals took to the streets to show their support for Nikki, while loyal supporters of Chris vehemently maintained his innocence, describing him as a gentle and loving person incapable of causing harm. Amidst the chaos, a lingering question arises. Was Nikki truly a victim of domestic violence? Or is she a manipulative liar? Poughkeepsie, New York, a city renowned for its historical charm and picturesque location along the Hudson River, has unfortunately gained notoriety due to the occurrence of high-profile murder cases, including the tragic incident involving Nikki Adamando in 2017. Despite the tragic events that occurred, Poughkeepsie continues to thrive as a diverse community, offering a range of cultural and recreational activities. However, the question remains, what happened to Nikki Adamando that prompted the entire Poughkeepsie community to rally behind her? Let's delve into the details. On the night of September 28, 2017, Officer Richard Sicily was patrolling the serene streets of Poughkeepsie, New York. It was approximately 2 a.m. when he noticed a car stopped at a red light. Even when the light turned green, the car remained motionless, suspecting a drowsy or inattentive driver. Officer Sicily politely honked his horn, unaware that this seemingly routine encounter was about to take an unexpected turn. As the car continued to stay stationary, Officer Sicily stepped out of his cruiser and approached it. To his surprise, a distressed woman, standing at just 5 feet tall and weighing no more than 100 pounds, emerged from the driver's seat. She was barefoot and visibly distraught. In the back seat, 2 children peacefully slept. Officer Sicily considered various possibilities. Perhaps the woman was lost or experiencing a medical emergency. However, he was completely unprepared for the shocking revelation that this distressed woman was about to disclose. The agitated woman, Nikki Adamando, quickly informed the officer that something terrible had occurred at her home. Naki explained that she had been enduring long-term abuse at the hands of her boyfriend, which had reached a breaking point on September 28, 2017. When she attempted to leave, her boyfriend, armed with a gun, threatened her with gestures of violence. After confiding in the officer, Nikki urgently reached out to her friend for assistance. Without hesitation, Elizabeth Clifton responded to Nikki's distress call. Upon her arrival, the officers requested that Elizabeth wait in a nearby parking lot, as there were still crucial details that needed to be uncovered. But who exactly was Nikki Adamando? Nikki, whose full name is Nicole Adamando, was born on November 19, 1988. At the age of 4, she relocated to Poughkeepsie, New York, alongside her family. Throughout her upbringing, she was recognized as a lively, carefree, and sociable young girl. In 2008, at the tender age of 19, commenced her employment at a local gym named Mr. Todd's Gymnastics. Within the establishment, she assumed the role of a children's gymnastics coach. It was during this time that she crossed paths with Christopher Grover, a fellow coach and colleague who was 21 years old. Their professional relationship swiftly evolved into something more profound, as Chris became Nikki's life partner. Tragically, Nikki alleged that she had shot Chris that fateful night due to his continuous abuse and threats towards her. Upon the officers' arrival at Nikki's apartment, they discovered Chris, her partner, seemingly asleep on the couch. However, he had already succumbed to a fatal gunshot wound to the head. A thorough search of the entire apartment revealed a running shower in the bathroom and a damaged laptop in the bathtub. Meanwhile, Elizabeth also received the shocking news of Chris' demise, leaving her utterly bewildered as she had never anticipated such a tragic outcome. Amidst the confusion, Nikki emerged as the sole individual capable of shedding light on the situation. Consequently, she was brought in for questioning at the police station to ascertain the motive behind Chris' murder. Was it truly a result of domestic violence, or were there other factors at play? Simultaneously, Gail Grover, Chris's mother, received the heart-wrenching news of her son's passing from the sheriff. Gail's immediate concern revolved around Nikki and the children. When she inquired with the sheriff, her primary question centered on the well-being of Nikki and the kids. Gail expressed her complete lack of understanding regarding the true cause of Chris's tragic fate. Chris was described as a kind and athletic individual. He possessed an abundance of energy, was outgoing and exuded charm. With a black belt in Taekwondo and serving as the head gymnastics coach at Mr. Todd's gym in Poughkeepsie, Chris was highly respected. His coaching style infused gymnastics with excitement, making him beloved by his students. In 2008, Chris and Nikki's close collaboration fostered a deep friendship that eventually blossomed into a romantic relationship. By 2012, they made the decision to live together, and Nikki expressed her gratitude for Chris' unwavering support, compassion, and understanding. He patiently waited for Nikki to be ready, and after a year, they joyfully announced her pregnancy. Their first child, Finn, arrived in 2013, and Chris proved to be an exceptional father who adored both Nikki and their child. 2 years later, in 2015, Nikki gave birth to their daughter, further solidifying their family bond. Nikki was regarded as an exceptional mother, as her love for her children was paramount. However, Elizabeth noticed some concerning changes in Nikki. She appeared more anxious than usual, displaying skittish behavior despite her typically gentle and soft-spoken nature. Nikki's sleep patterns and appetite suffered, indicating her overall well-being was compromised. Elizabeth attributed these changes to Nikki's juggling of multiple responsibilities, including studying early childhood education, working at a preschool, caring for her children, and maintaining her job at the gym. Not only Elizabeth, but Nikki's childhood friends, Laura McAdoo New and Rachel Hawkes, also observed something amiss. It wasn't just Nikki's behavior that raised concern, but the visible injuries and bruises scattered across her body. On September 28, 2017, Child Protection Services, CPS, paid a visit to Chris' apartment following a report from an anonymous parent at the gym where Chris still worked. Concerns were raised after witnessing Chris losing his temper with students and noticing Nikki, who was covered in marks. The The parent became worried about Nikki and the children at home. However, the struck later that night when Chris was discovered dead in his apartment. In the interrogation room, Naki desperately tried to explain why she had killed Chris. She genuinely believed that the detectives would recognize her actions as self-defense rather than intentional murder. Naki was confident that her innocence would be proven through evidence and her actions. To her surprise, Naki was arrested for Chris' murder. This turn of events left everyone close to her and her supporters, who believed Nikki was a victim of domestic violence, heartbroken and questioning why she was being held responsible for defending herself. Elizabeth held the key to this mystery, and it all began in April 2016 when she expressed her concerns about Nikki's injuries. Elizabeth was genuinely afraid for Nikki's safety at home with Chris. In response, Nikki confided in Elizabeth, admitting that Chris was abusing her on a daily basis. However, Elizabeth was not the only one to uncover the truth. Journalist Rachel Snyder, who had dedicated 10 years to studying domestic violence, stumbled upon Nikki's case. After reading numerous articles and speaking to various individuals, Snyder also believed that Chris was physically assaulting Nikki. Initially, although Chris displayed occasional violence, the situation was not too severe. During Naki's pregnancy in 2013, he displayed qualities of gentleness, sweetness, and care. Naki held on to hope, believing that the arrival of their baby would strengthen their relationship. The anticipation of becoming parents seemed to smooth out the rough patches in their relationship. However, after their son, Ben, was born, their situation took a dark turn. Naki made the difficult decision to leave her job at the preschool and focus on establishing her own photography business, as well as selling homemade booties for infants. Initially, Chris proved to be a great father and provided assistance with Ben. However, approximately 6 weeks later, he began pressuring Nikki for intimacy, which placed a strain on their relationship. A few days later, Nikki experienced severe swelling in her face and jaw, rendering her unable to chew. She sought medical help at Vassar Brothers Hospital in Poughkeepsie. Her condition was so severe that a domestic assistance program was contacted to intervene and encouraged Nikki to take action. The examiner's records noted the extent of Nikki's injuries, which made it difficult for her to speak audibly. Despite the severity of her injuries, Nikki chose not to file a police report out of fear that Chris would take Ben away from her. Unfortunately, their troubles did not end there. In 2015, 2 years after the birth of their daughter, Fane, a similar incident occurred. A few weeks later, while Nikki was cooking eggs for Ben, Chris demanded that she make enough for him as well. In a sarcastic tone, Nikki replied with a "yes, sir," which triggered an extreme anger in Chris. He proceeded to grab a metal spoon and heat it on the gas stove flame. Holding Nikki's other arm, he burned her in multiple places with a scorching spoon. Enduring excruciating pain, could only plead for him to stop. She sought medical treatment once again, and this time, the examiner documented her injuries through photographs. The images revealed bite marks on her shoulder and back, as well as burns covering her body. Chris' obsession with violent adult internet content took a sinister turn for Nikki when he began to act out scenes from those videos, going to extreme lengths to carry out aggressive acts against her. This included tying her up, physically assaulting her, and even using a weapon to choke her until she lost consciousness. Shockingly, Chris recorded all of these horrifying incidents without Nikki's consent. Despite the severe abuse she endured, Nikki hesitated to report it to the police out of fear that Child Protective Services might take her children away if she identified herself as a victim. This fear haunted Nikki, and she was determined to protect her children at all costs. Despite the urging of her friend Elizabeth and others, Nikki's emotional paralysis prevented her from pressing charges against Chris. In 2016, Elizabeth went above and beyond to help Nikki escape her abusive situation. Nikki packed her children into the car and drove to Elizabeth's house, but she couldn't bring herself to stop. She circled in front of the house, slowing down and then speeding up again for hours on end. Elizabeth watched in concern as Nikki repeatedly drove past. Finally, Elizabeth called out to Nikki, pleading for her to stop and come inside. Tearfully, Nikki admitted that she couldn't do it. The fear of Chris' reaction held her captive, and she believed that he would never forgive her if she left. Throughout 2017, Nikki sought medical help multiple times for various violent incidents. She had rope-like burns around her neck and body, frequent bruises and bleeding. Nikki also reported that Chris had a gun and had attempted to use it against her. Then, on September 28, 2017, Child Protective Services made an anonymous visit, drawing attention to their situation. The worker discreetly asked Nikki if she was safe at that moment, to which she nodded yes. The worker that inquired about the presence of weapons in the house, but Nikki lied and claimed there were none, despite Chris owning a gun. When the worker inquired about the bruises on Nikki, both Chris and Nikki asserted that they were merely engaging in normal fights and arguments like any other couple. Consequently, the worker saw no reason to take immediate action and departed from the scene. Meanwhile, Chris had temporarily left the house but returned later in the evening. According to Nikki, he appeared calm and even kind. Surprisingly, they were intimate after putting the children to bed. In this time, Chris displayed a much gentler demeanor than Nikki had grown accustomed to. At one point, after leaving the room, Chris called Nikki again, this time holding his gun. He asked her to look at it and proceeded to demonstrate its functionality, while she nervously observed. In a chilling moment, he casually mentioned, I could kill you in your sleep, leaving Nikki feeling extremely unsafe. In an attempt to relax, she decided to take a shower. However, while she was in the shower, Chris unexpectedly entered the bathroom, stating that he could shoot her in there, but it would be too loud. Shockingly, he then threw the laptop into the tub. After Nikki finished showering, Chris forced himself onto her, creating a distressing and uncomfortable situation. As soon as she entered the living room, Chris instructed Nikki to lie down on top of him on the couch. Feeling fearful, Nikki complied for a while. However, when she sensed that Chris had finally fallen asleep, she cautiously attempted to sneak away. Unfortunately, her attempt took a frightening turn when Chris suddenly woke up and reached for the gun hidden in the couch cushion. In an effort to protect herself, Nikki swatted away Chris' arm, causing him to drop the gun onto the floor. This gave Nikki the opportunity to swiftly grab the weapon and point it at him. Chris reclined on the couch with an air of nonchalance, seemingly unaffected by the situation. This lack of concern may have been a result of the damage he had already inflicted on Nikki's self-esteem and confidence. In a taunting manner, Chris dared Nikki to shoot him, threatening a grim outcome that involved taking both their lives and leaving their children without anyone. Before he could finish his sentence, Nikki swiftly lunged at him, pulling the trigger without hesitation. She believed it was a matter of kill or be killed. However, the night took an unexpected turn when Nikki, instead of being seen as a victim, found herself arrested for Chris Grover's death. In March 2019, Nikki Adamando, who had been out on bail, faced trial for the murder of her partner. The Poughkeepsie court became a gathering place for friends and advocates, all wearing purple to symbolize support for victims of domestic violence. On one side, loyal supporters of Chris stood, firmly convinced of his calm and gentle nature. Unable to believe he could harm anyone, they were shocked to hear Nikki's defense, which relied on claims of his alleged abuse and violence towards her. Chris's mother, Gail, vehemently rejected these allegations and maintained her belief in her son's innocence throughout the trial. The courtroom became a battleground for conflicting perspectives on this tragic and twisted case of violence. Inside the Dutchess County Courthouse in Poughkeepsie, prosecutors argued that Nikki portrayed herself as a victim, asserting that all her claims of domestic violence from Chris were false. Prosecutor Chana Kraus, who had dedicated much of her career to advocating for victims of physical abuse, remained skeptical of Nikki's narrative. To her, Nikki did not fit the typical profile of an abuse victim. During the trial, Prosecutor Kraus emphasized the first piece of physical evidence: the gun Nikki used to kill Chris. She stressed that Chris sustained a direct contact wound to the head. Additionally, the testimony from the medical examiner provided further evidence, stating that the gun muzzle imprint on Chris' head indicated that it was embedded when Nikki pulled the trigger. Therefore, if Chris had been awake, Nikki would not have been able to shoot at such close range. This suggests that Chris was likely asleep at the time of the incident. casting doubt on Nikki's claim of self-defense. Krause also argued that it was actually Nikki, not Chris, who threw the laptop in the tub, suggesting that Nikki may have been trying to make it appear as if Chris was attempting to hide evidence of violence that was recorded on it. However, Nikki may not have anticipated that the laptop could be recovered in a way that allowed its contents to be examined, revealing no evidence of abuse. To support her argument, Krause presented a series of texts Nikki sent to Chris days before his death, in which she referred to him as a man-child and questioned his intelligence. According to Krause, these texts suggest that Nikki was the one who was abusive towards Chris. Adding a twist to the case, Krause also presented damning evidence of multiple internet searches on Chris's phone on the night he died, and she believed that Nikki was responsible for these searches. In a text sent 6 weeks before the incident, Nikki expressed her frustration, stating, "I haven't figured out a way to kill him without being caught, so I'm still here." This led the prosecutor, Krause, to discuss a dark chapter in Nikki's life that had a profound impact on her. She acknowledged that Nikki had experienced a traumatic event at the age of 5 during a sleepover at her friend, Caitlin's house. Caitlin lived with her mother and her mother's boyfriend, whom Nikki referred to as Uncle Butch. In the middle of the night, Nikki, who was sleeping with Caitlin, was abruptly awakened by Butch, who attempted to assault her. Regrettably, Caitlin, also a victim of Butch, was unable to assist Nikki during that distressing moment. When Nikki confided in her mother Belinda about the incident, it was met with denial and a plea to forget about it. Nevertheless, this incident had a profound impact on Nikki, causing her to become an extremely timid and reserved individual. It affected her ability to trust others and influenced the way she formed relationships. Even when Nikki met Chris, she still carried the haunting memories of her past experiences, making intimacy uncomfortable for her. Despite this, Chris, appearing to be a caring partner, respected her emotions and agreed to wait until she felt ready. His love and care for Nikki remained steadfast throughout. So if Chris was always kind to Nikki, how did the stories of abuse come about? Krause alleged that Nikki fabricated these stories of abuse by Chris. She pointed out that Nikki never reported these accusations to the police, but only shared them with friends and therapists. A few years into her relationship with Chris, Nikki disclosed to her therapists that when she lived in an apartment complex with her mother would invite maintenance workers over for drinks. On a day when Nikki was home alone, a maintenance worker came by for repairs and attempted to assault her. However, Nikki later admitted that her memories of the attacker were unclear and she wasn't certain if it was the maintenance worker or if she had confused it with memories involving Chris. Around the same time, Nikki encountered a married police officer who was the father of one of her gymnastics students. He offered Nikki the opportunity to live with him, his wife, and children as a babysitter. Initially, she saw the 45-year-old man as a protector and even a father figure. However, as Nikki spent more time with the family, she grew increasingly uneasy. There was even a point when he tried to abuse and assault Nikki. It is a complex task to understand the circumstances in which their relationship began, particularly considering that she was still living with Chris and was pregnant with Ben. When discussing the marks and bruises on Nikki's body, Krause contended that her injuries often had innocent explanations. Not all bruises were a result of violence. Many were actually self-inflicted. Krause highlighted that even the medical records were not straightforward. During Nikki's initial visit to Vassar Brothers Hospital, she was asked a series of questions regarding the abuse, the injuries inflicted on her, and the burn marks all over her body. At that time, consistently denied that anyone had harmed her. However, after Fane was born, she returned to the hospital and answered affirmatively to every single one of those questions. Krause suggested that Nikki was attempting to solely blame Chris for all the abuse she had endured, making him the primary culprit. Following the visit from Child Protective Services that night, Nikki feared that her fabricated stories of abuse would be exposed, potentially resulting in the loss of her children, which was her greatest fear. As the defense case unfolded, Attorney John and Ben Eastrier argued that Nikki lived in constant danger with Chris. They asserted that if she had not fought back and killed him that night, it would have been her life in jeopardy instead of Chris. Throughout the trial, Nikki's lawyers faced the challenge of persuading the jury that on the night of September 28, 2017, she acted in self-defense. Their argument revolved around the idea that Nikki shot Chris to save her own life and the lives of her children. To support their claims, Nikki's lawyers presented witnesses, including psychologists, examiners, midwives, and friends who testified about the extensive abuse she had suffered at the hands of Chris over the years. These concerned individuals, having witnessed Nikki's distressing situation, were genuinely worried about her safety. They consistently advised her to leave Chris and report the violence to law enforcement. Despite their well-intentioned advice, Nikki, scared of Chris, never felt brave enough to take such steps. Furthermore, they presented a photograph of Nikki's injuries and bruises in court, emphasizing that these marks could not have been self-inflicted. They pointed out specific injuries such as bite marks on her neck, rope marks on her neck and hands, and bruises from physical violence all over her body. This raised the lingering question, if neither Chris nor Nikki caused these bruises, then who was responsible? Nikki's lawyers argued that the other men mentioned by the prosecution were merely brought up to create confusion and shamed Nikki by suggesting she was involved with multiple men. According to them, the truth was clear. She had no physical relationship with anyone other than Chris. They believed that it was not crucial to focus on whether Chris was victimizing her with intimate partner violence. Instead, they stressed the importance of determining whether killing Chris was the right decision or not. The defense contended that the aggressive texts Nikki sent were typical responses when someone feels uncomfortable, challenging the prosecution's narrative. They also highlighted to the jurors that all the internet searches on how to kill someone while sleeping were found on Chris's phone, with no proof that Nikki had conducted those searches. While some speculated that Chris might be responsible, there was no evidence supporting that idea. The lawyers further argued that the medical examiner, Dr. Newman, testified that there was no proof Chris was actually sleeping at the time of the incident. He suggested that it could have happened the way Nikki described. To uncover the exact truth, they called Nikki herself to the stand so that the jurors could hear directly from her about what truly happened to her. Nikki, visibly shaken and in tears, testified in court about Chris's tendency to lash out whenever he felt disrespected. She recounted instances of abuse, including physical assault, choking, and being tied up for hours. Nikki also revealed that after their child was born, Chris began obsessively watching adult violent content and attempting to recreate it with her. Her attorneys presented graphic photos and videos, although Chris was always absent from the recorded footage. These videos were uploaded on an adult website featuring violent content and disrespectful language under the username Grove Respect. Surprisingly, the jurors seemed to overlook the disturbing nature of the videos. Grove Respect described himself as a 29-year-old cinematographer with a passion for martial arts, similar to Chris. However, the judge ruled that there was insufficient evidence to prove Chris's involvement in creating and posting the videos. The case took a surprising turn when undisclosed evidence emerged, including Nikki's full medical report from 2014 detailing the violence she endured. Additionally, midwife exams revealed injuries sustained the summer before Chris's death, which had been kept hidden. While it is not uncommon for certain evidence to be excluded in a murder trial, many argue that omitting this evidence was a mistake. Prosecutor Krauss suggested that Nikki may have fabricated the explicit videos herself, as there was no way to definitively identify the man in the footage. Krauss believed that Nikki had been gradually building a case against Chris, which explained his absence from the evidence presented. Nikki's anxiety during the trial was also observed by her prosecutors and Chris' mother. After extensive arguments and testimonies in Nikki's case, there were differing opinions, with some believing Nikki's innocence and others thinking Chris was innocent. Following 14 days of testimony, the case was handed over to the jurors, who faced the difficult task of determining whether Nikki Adamando was a frightened victim or a deceitful liar. After 3 days of deliberation, a verdict was announced. In April 2019, the jury, comprised of 8 women and 4 men, dismissed Nikki's self-defense claim and found her guilty of criminal possession of a weapon and second-degree murder. Consequently, she was sentenced to 19 years to life imprisonment. The jury's decision to convict Nikki, despite her traumatic experiences and potential harm, left many people shocked. Some believed it resembled a real-life Gone Girl scenario, suggesting that Nikki had meticulously planned everything for years, even causing injuries to herself to later justify killing Chris. On the other hand, Chris's family and friends felt a sense of relief upon hearing that the jury believed Chris was innocent and not responsible for abusing Nikki in any way. As a result of the updated New York state law in 2019, known as the Domestic Violence Survivors Justice Act, Nikki was granted the opportunity for another day in court. In 2020, a hearing took place where her claims of domestic violence played a significant role in reducing her sentence. This law empowered the judge to take into account the defendant's status as a victim and how it influenced the crime they committed when determining the appropriate sentencing. Judge Edward McLaughlin, who was presiding over Nikki's trial, listened to arguments from prosecutors who asserted that Nikki was not a genuine victim. They argued that she had access to services and could have left Chris at any time, even on the day he died. However, Nikki's supporters countered this by stating that labeling her as not a real victim oversimplified the intricate dynamics of domestic violence. Cross, Nikki's advocate, emphasized that she had the means to leave, including a car, and could have done so on the day Chris died. Nikki's defense team stressed that leaving was not a straightforward option, as she could have faced severe consequences even if she had left Chris. Challenging the misconception that escaping abusive relationships is easy, despite seeking help from support services, Nikki faced challenges in finding a safe way out due to her responsibilities as a mother to 2 young children. Even on the night of Chris's death, Nikki disclosed to the authorities that she had pleaded with him on numerous occasions, at least 17 times, to let her go. She had promised not to disclose anything, but Chris adamantly refused to allow her to leave. In Nikki's defense, her legal team argued that leaving an abusive and violent partner does not necessarily guarantee ones. They emphasized that even if Nikki had left Chris, the risk of harm could persist, making leaving not a guaranteed option for her safety. The defense suggested that escaping an ongoing abusive situation posed its own set of dangers and challenges for Nikki. In February 2020, the judge leaned towards the prosecution's argument, stating that Nikki was very close to her front door on the night Chris died and could have left. The judge also noted that Nikki's inconsistent statements about past abuse made it difficult to determine the identity of her abuser. However, despite this, many of Nikki's supporters firmly believed that she was the true victim, emphasizing that all the documented instances of abuse point to Chris as the perpetrator. Nikki's supporters gathered outside the Poughkeepsie courthouse, and although the court did not overturn her conviction, they ruled in her favor. They decided that she deserved a reduced sentence under the Survivors Justice Act, changing it from 19 years to life to 7.5 years in prison. With 5 years already served, Nikki's release was scheduled for 2024, and she was ultimately released on January 4, 2024, at the age of 35. While Nikki served her time behind bars, her children found a home with relatives, and the Grover family faithfully visited them every other day. Nikki and Chris are the sole individuals privy to the enigma that unfolded on that fateful evening of September 28, 2017. Regrettably, only one of them remains alive to recount their perspective. Domestic violence is a pervasive issue that can affect anyone, yet voicing one's experience proves to be an arduous task. Considering these circumstances, it prompts us to ponder, was Nikki genuinely a victim in this particular instance? Alternatively, despite seemingly possessing an enviable life, was she a deceitful manipulator? It is said that on February 4, 1989, at around 4:15 a.m., an intruder broke into an apartment in the 3100 block of Casa de Campo, San Mateo County, California. Using the kitchen knife he found in the apartment and abandoned it to hide his identity, the intruder used violence and threats to get into a woman's bed. He gave her a horrifying experience that included stabbing, strangling, and assault. Surprisingly, the victim managed to get the attacker to back down and immediately called the police. How did the assailant get in without being noticed? And who might this unidentified intruder be? With a population of 764,442, San Mateo County is well known for being close to Silicon Valley, which has an influence on its lifestyle by blending urban and suburban elements. Parks and historical sites are examples of recreational areas that add a cultural touch. While the crime rate is comparatively low when compared to other parts of California, the population is diverse and frequently involved in technology and innovation. The safety of the community is prioritized. In 2023, the John Harris Jr. cold case is brought up, bringing attention to one case of unsolved crime in this otherwise tranquil county. A violent incident occurred in the quiet neighborhood of San Mateo, California, in the early hours of February 4, 1989, leaving the 3100 block of Casa de Campo scarred for many years. In a disconcerting security lapse, a single man entered an apartment. His first action was cutting himself with a kitchen knife, a common object that was turned into a weapon. The burglar really went overboard when he proceeded to the victim's bedroom and began attacking her there as well as at her residence. The suspect launched a physical and psychological attack on her after climbing into the bed in which she was sleeping. He choked and stabbed the victim in what turned into a struggle for her life, barely missing her jugular vein. A deadly coincidence that spared her life. The woman showed an incredible will to live despite such horror. She fought back against the attacker, was hiding his face behind a bandana. Her fortitude was impressive, and she persuaded him to leave the apartment through a combination of bravery and quick thinking. This act of convincing the assailant to leave would later pique the interest and amazement of all who heard about the incident. The woman immediately called the police. When the police were alerted, they descended on the scene with a sense of urgency. They conducted interviews and meticulously processed the crime scene in search of fingerprints, DNA, or any other clue that could lead them to the perpetrator. They exerted great effort. The attacker's identity was still unknown despite the meticulous attention to detail. The trail became quiet and the leads grew cold as weeks turned into months and months into years. The assault case file was filled with notes and reports, but no definitive answers. The perpetrator of the horrifying crime within the walls of that apartment vanished into the ether, leaving behind a victim still dealing with the fallout, and a community in shock. The DNA evidence gathered from the Casa de Campo attack scene was stored for more than 30 years. A silent witness waiting for science to catch up. As DNA technology advanced, investigators did not let the case gather dust. They persevered in resubmitting the DNA evidence, hoping that each time there would be some revelation that would allow the truth to be heard. Their perseverance was rewarded. In December 2020, the evidence from that fateful night collided with the ongoing use of technology in forensic science. A match was discovered, an accomplishment that would have seemed almost miraculous to investigators in 1989. It turned out that the man identified by the DNA match, John Harris Jr., had resided in the victim's neighborhood. John Harris Jr. had stayed out of the public eye for the previous 30 years, even though their paths had not intentionally crossed. Following the event, he appeared to have lived in San Joaquin County, not too close to the crime scene, but far enough away to avoid being noticed. He had moved to Arizona by the time of the DNA match. Law enforcement and the community were both touched by the revelation that the suspect was leading a regular life, and may have thought that his chances of success had diminished with the passage of time. After Harris's identification, the case gained fresh momentum after going cold. New leads were now shedding light on questions that had lingered for years. Equipped with fresh data and a name, the inquiry team began piecing together John Harris Jr. movements and life during the previous 3 decades. They had to know how he avoided being detected and what connections he might have had to the area he had once called home. After the identity of the suspect was made public, the case took a significant turn and now had a defined course. It reinforced the message that justice is persistent, no matter how long it takes, and it gave some hope to those who think the case may never be solved. Thanks to a DNA breakthrough, the name John Harris Jr. is now at the center of a long-standing cold case that is coming out of the shadows. Who is John Harris Jr.? His background is complicated and mysterious, much like the crime he is suspected of. He was born in 1966. Since the public still does not know the specifics of Harris's birth parents or early years, he appears to be a ghost in the story of his own purported crime. It is thought that Harris spent the majority of his life in San Joaquin County, California. However, little is known about his life outside of his neighborhood. By 2020, he had established himself as a resident of Arizona in the context of his career. In Manteca, Harris carved out a niche for himself working for a company that installed surveillance systems. An ironic detail considering his subsequent criminal accusations. Harris appears to be a man who has managed to live a private life based on the skin information available about him. It is known that Harris was not a very noticeable person. There were no obvious indicators of a difficult upbringing or difficult educational path that the general public is aware of. The abrupt connection to a violent crime is all the more startling given the lack of a known criminal past. Harris is the primary suspect in an attempted murder case, and his DNA has permanently linked him to a horrific deed, raising the possibility that beneath the surface of a normal life, there may be a history of darker tendencies. There have been no disclosed marriages or family relationships. In many ways, Harris appears to be a lone individual cut off from the social pillars that support most people's lives. His former community in San Joaquin County and beyond have surely felt the impact of his name becoming associated with the case. The close proximity of a man suspected of a dangerous crime is causing discomfort to neighbors who previously might have simply nodded to him passing. John Harris Jr. experienced an abrupt upheaval in his life at the age of 55. He was taken into custody on Wednesday, February 25, 2021. On suspicion of attempting murder, he was apprehended by the long arm of the law not far from his Manteca, California workplace. Not only was this arrest the consequence of diligent police work, but it also marked a significant advancement in DNA analysis. The arrest was made by local detectives in collaboration with district attorney investigators, according to San Mateo Police Chief E. Barberini. It took Matt Broad, an inspector with the district attorney's office, persistently reopening the case at the request of District Attorney Inspector Kevin Raffaelli, for there to be an immediate connection. At the time, Raffaelli was a San Mateo police surgeon who was heavily involved in the investigation of this especially unsettling case. The investigators' determination was unwavering in their pursuit of justice for the atrocious crime committed in 1989. Harris appeared to have lived the nomadic life in the Bay Area, having lived in the counties of San Mateo, Alameda, San Francisco, and San Joel, Queen. Despite this, he had remained unnoticed, as his DNA was not found in the National Law Enforcement Database. To establish a connection, the investigators had to pivot and use advanced genealogical methods similar to the one used to discover the identity of the infamous Golden State Killer, Joseph James DeAngelo. In the end, it was his DNA that linked him to the case. Inspector Brolitz said that this scientific match would become the cornerstone of the case, unquestionably connecting Harris to the crime that had plagued the victims and the community for more than 3 decades. This statement summed up the results of tireless investigative efforts. As he considered the nature of the crime, Raffaelli noted how inhumane it was and how it left a lasting impression on the people who worked the case. At the time, Samatia was not used to handling crimes of that terrible caliber, and the local law enforcement had a collective memory of this specific incident. Steve Wagstaff, the district attorney, acknowledged the intricacy and skill of the investigation. Since Harris's DNA was missing from the databases that were usually checked, the investigating team had to use more creative ways to find the criminal. After being arrested, Harris was detained at the San Mateo County Jail with a hefty $500,000 bail. The community, which had previously been unaware of a seemingly ordinary man's dark past, was now confronted with the chilling reality of his alleged actions. For the victim and others impacted, this arrest represented a much-needed step toward justice and closure. On February 25, 2021, a gloomy Friday afternoon, John Harris Jr. appeared before the bench at San Mateo County Superior Court in Redwood City to answer to his charges. The seriousness of the situation was evident as he was about to be arraigning for 2 serious charges: attempted murder and aggravated mayhem, both of which carries a harsh life sentence. Given the gravity of the accusations, Justice Berberis handled the case with a calm disposition. Following Supreme Court Rule 23, the courtroom recognized that the rulings in this case would not establish a precedent. Therefore, the case's implications were limited to the present. When delivering the court's ruling, Justices Barbaras, Vaughn, and McCaney presented a united front. John Harris Jr., attempt to review his conviction was unsuccessful due to the intricate legal proceedings. The court summarily dismissed his post-conviction petition in attempt to revoke his previous guilty plea for first-degree murder. This dismissal was not taken lightly following Harris Jr.'s appointment to the Appellate Council. The Office of the State Appellate Defender, or OSAD, submitted a withdrawal motion claiming that there was insufficient justification for the court's ruling to be incorrect. Harris Jr. was given the chance to reply, but he did not, so the court granted the motion and upheld the dismissal. The background to Harris Jr.'s current situation showed a complex legal battle. He had first accepted a guilty plea to first-degree murder in exchange for a shorter sentence of 25 years. But allegations of incompetent counsel and coercion emerged, and his guilty plea was temporarily withheld at a subsequent Krinkle hearing. The state's argument that they were unfairly excluded from the Krinkle hearing resulted in the guilty plea being reinstated. On appeal, Harris Jr. claimed that his constitutional rights were violated when the guilty plea was reinstated. The court denied the appeal, stating that the initial withdrawal was premature and that his plea was voluntary and informed upon review. Harris Jr.'s subsequent post-conviction petition was an attempt to work around these previous rulings. He asserted new arguments of collaboration between the trial court defense counsel and the prosecutor, but the court rejected them. The OSAD upheld the verdict. His actual innocence claim, which lacked new evidence or proof, was also rejected by the court. The petition was properly dismissed within the procedural boundaries, according to Justice Barbaras, because it did not present any reasonably arguable issues. Finally, the court's decision was binding, the motion was granted, and the judgment was upheld. Harris Jr.'s attempt to obtain a new trial was ultimately unsuccessful due to the principle that once a case is decided, it cannot be pursued again. In a recent news conference, a San Mateo police chief, ITT Barberini, expressed the victim's relief and gratitude in the John Harris Jr. case, which had gone unsolved for over 3 decades. The victim, who has been through the unimaginable for the past 32 years, now has some closure. The arrest of a suspect was made possible by the combined efforts of the San Mateo County District Attorneys and investigators, the FBI's San Francisco and Los Angeles divisions, Manteca Police, and San Mateo Police detectives. It demonstrates their commitment and the power of collaborative law enforcement. Authorities have stated that there may be additional victims. They are currently processing additional DNA in order to uncover additional evidence to help with the ongoing investigation. Police in San Mateo are encouraging anyone with information about Harris to come forward. Evening of May 30th, 2012, 19-year-old Brittany Wood dressed up and departed from her mother's residence in Mobile, Alabama, somewhere between 7 and 7:30 p.m. Everyone had assumed that Brittany was off to visit her friend, but the reality was far from it. Unbeknownst to those around her, Brittany's true destination was her uncle, Donnie Holland's home. However, what began as an ordinary visit would unfold into a nightmarish ordeal for both the family and law enforcement. 2 days later, on June 1st, 2012, the police made a gruesome discovery. Donnie, Brittany's uncle, was found in his car, a gunshot wound to the back of his head, revealing a chilling crime scene. The shocking and blood-stained scene added a layer of mystery, intensifying further. Brittany Wood remained mysteriously absent. Did Brittany play a role in Donnie's death? And if so, what drove her to such actions? Or was it someone else who not only killed Donnie, but also kidnapped Brittany? Brittany always had a dream of becoming a hairdresser and opening her salon one day. However, the young girl just in her teenage years would come across a man named Andy Woods. Their connection blossomed, leading to the joyous arrival of their beautiful daughter, Peyton, in 2009 when Brittany was just 18. While initially relishing the freedom of youth, the birth of Peyton signaled a profound change in Brittany's life. However, her life took an even more significant turn when, just a few months after Peyton's birth, and Brittany parted ways. Despite the breakup, the two made the decision to share custody, maintaining a positive and amicable relationship for the well-being of their daughter. Subsequently, Brittany ventured into dating, encountering several relationships that proved short-lived. Brittany found joy in spending time with her family, particularly her brother Derek, whom she considered as her protector. Reflecting on her past, Brittany's tumultuous experiences were also rooted during her childhood days. Her father, Wallace Hankey, had divorced her mother Chessie Wood when she was just a baby. Despite the divorce, Brittany maintained a positive relationship with her father. However, the main complication arose in her connection with her uncle, Donnie Holland. Donnie seemed like a fun-loving guy to everyone, always nice to those around him. However, beneath the surface his story was more complex than it appeared. At the time of his death, Donnie was actually under investigation for his alleged involvement in a child abuse ring, which extended to include other family members, even reaching members of Brittany's household. Now, is there a connection between everything that transpired in the past leading to the ultimate death of Donnie and Brittany's disappearance? On the evening of May 30th, 2012, Brittany left her house around 7:30 p.m. with her family assuming she was visiting a friend. Despite attempts to contact her later that night, they couldn't reach Brittany. The family, accustomed to her spending days with her friends, didn't initially suspect anything was amiss. However, unbeknownst to them, this was not just one of those nights. As Brittany's whereabouts remained unknown, chilling revelation awaited the family 2 days later. On June 1st, 2012, Donnie Holland, Brittany's uncle, was found in his car with the engine still running, left in a secluded area overlooking the Fish River. He had a gunshot wound to the back of his head behind his ear. He was transported to a local hospital, but had passed away. Upon learning this distressing news, Brittany's family attempted once more to contact her and share the tragic information. Unfortunately, their attempts were in vain as her phone remained unresponsive, indicating that it was dead. When they were unable to locate Brittany at her usual hangouts, the family grew increasingly concerned. In response, they swiftly headed to the Mobile County Police Station and filed a missing person report. This set off a series of investigations encompassing both Donnie and Brittany. Now, at the crime scene, the police conducted an exhaustive search for any evidence that could swiftly solve the case. Their thorough sweep revealed a small gun and a phone battery inside the car. While at the hospital, Brittany's mother, Chessie, mentioned that bags had been placed on Donnie's hands, presumably later for testing for gunshot residue. However, it remains unclear why these bags were removed without undergoing testing. In addition to the investigation, the police interviewed Donnie's wife, Wendy Holland, and their friend, Jennifer Gonzalez Moore, the individuals who discovered Donnie's body. They reported that Donnie was still gurgling blood when found approximately a mile away from the main road. The specifics of the interrogation, including whether Donnie was alive or not and the reason for their search, remain undisclosed. However, there was a significant suspicion that Wendy might be somehow connected to this incident. The police gathered the phone battery and the gun, presuming it to be the weapon used to shoot Donnie. However, surprising turn of events occurred when Brittany's best friend, Tiffany Bailey, confirmed that the gun belonged to Brittany. Tiffany revealed that Brittany had purchased the gun for protection shortly before her disappearance. With suspicions running high, questions arose about whether Wendy and her friend were involved or if Brittany played a role. However, another perspective on the story was yet to be explored. At the time of his death, Donnie was under investigation for his alleged participation in a troubling child abuse ring that implicated several of his own family members. A mere 30 minutes before his scheduled meeting with the investigators to discuss these allegations, he succumbed to a fatal gunshot while seated in his vehicle. Eric Winberg, a former detective with the Baldwin County Sheriff's Office, posited the belief that Donnie likely anticipated arrest and as a result took his own life shortly before the planned police meeting. Amidst the suspicions and assumptions, the quest for truth began. The investigation was initiated by scrutinizing phone records. It was revealed that the battery found in Donnie's car belonged to Brittany's cell phone. Furthermore, the call records confirmed that Donnie and Brittany did in fact meet on May 30th, 2012, the day she went missing. Records revealed that Donnie had picked up Brittany at her home in Mobile and drove her to the residence in the Styx River area. Brittany's text records revealed continuous messaging until 11:30 p.m., abruptly ceasing at that point. In the early hours of May 31st, they returned to Mobile, coinciding with the moment her phone ceased functioning. preventing any further data collection. Healed by these revelations, the police force took drastic measures in their pursuit of Brittany. A widespread search ensued, mobilizing volunteers, the search and rescue unit, helicopters, dogs, and boats. The operation spanned a 5-mile radius around the Styx River Basin, the last location where Brittany's phone had pinged. Despite numerous interviews with her friends and family, the exhaustive efforts yielded no trace of her whereabouts. Meanwhile, Brittany's daughter also longed to see her mother. However, faced with a failed search for Brittany, the focus shifted back to Wendy. Police noted that on the day Donnie was discovered dead, Wendy was observed deleting items from Donnie's phone, suggesting an attempt to conceal something. Initially overlooked, this action gained significance as the investigation hit a dead end, prompting the police to turn their attention back to Wendy. The DNA results from the car yielded no conclusive evidence and the case reached a standstill. Soon, no further evidence surfaced to link anyone to the murder of Donnie Holland. Consequently, the case was closed, officially declaring it as a suicide. The decision to close the case as a suicide sparked controversy and raised many questions. Becca Johnson, a private investigator actively involved in the search for Brittany Wood, expressed skepticism, stating, "Generally, it's 4 to 5 hours till unpreserved gunshot residue is gone. And, hands in bags, it's being preserved. So I don't understand why that wasn't done, even if they thought it was an apparent suicide." Detective Eric Wenberg confirmed that the gunshot residue test was not conducted because it was a procedure performed by the Alabama Department of Forensic Sciences at that particular time. Firearms expert Cameron Busey pointed out that the brain matter and bone fragments would likely have embedded into Donnie's hands if he had shot himself. However, no test was conducted to determine this aspect as well. Moreover, Busey highlighted that placing the gun behind one's head would be highly unusual. "I don't know of any suicide that was done in that position." However, despite various concerns and observations, the cause of death was officially determined as suicide and no concrete evidence emerged to challenge this conclusion. Although the case of Donnie concluded unexpectedly, the investigation delved deeper into unraveling its complexities as they explored the possibility of a family member being involved in the crime. The investigations exposed a disturbing history that the family had been hiding for years. They found that Donnie Holland headed a child abuse ring with the involvement of at least 11 other family members or friends. They had been abusing and exploiting children, including their own, for decades. As the police examined Brittany's Facebook profile, they discovered additional evidence linking the family to these accusations. Donnie's wife, Wendy, and Brittany's beloved brother, Derek, were among the 11 family members arrested for their involvement in the abuse ring. Adding to the gravity of the situation, his mother, Chessie, faced charges of child abuse. Despite maintaining her innocence, the allegations against the mother included an assault on another underage female relative. As the inquiry progressed, information from Brittany's friends, to whom she had confided, surfaced. It was disclosed that Brittany herself had been a victim of Donnie's abuse when she was just 9 years old. According to her friends, Brittany had intentions of confronting Donnie and exposing him to the authorities. The revelation raised a significant question. Did Brittany kill Donnie out of revenge? While the hypothesis had a compelling backstory, the absence of concrete evidence made it purely speculative. In a simpler narrative or a motive, it might have been the audience's initial thought that Brittany was responsible for Donnie's death, considering the backstory and her subsequent disappearance, especially with her gun found. However, in legal procedures, evidence is paramount, and without sufficient proof, no further investigation into her involvement was pursued. Alongside the theory of Brittany seeking revenge, another hypothesis emerged. Could a past victim have killed Donnie out of revenge and subsequently kidnapped Brittany? The motive behind kidnapping Brittany remained unclear, but her unexplained disappearance prompted questions about whether she was still alive. While various hypotheses circulated, the undeniable fact was that Brittany's family was on the verge of facing the legal consequences. Nevertheless, Chessie, Brittany's mother, expressed frustration that her daughter had not been located yet. On December 9, 2014, a young victim testified against Donnie's wife, Wendy Holland, In court, the testimony included the harrowing account of the victim's earliest memories involving abuse by adult relatives, one of whom was the defendant, Wendy Wood Holland, who was 35 at the time. During the largest case in Alabama, which involved the prosecution of 10 individuals, the teen girl testified that the relatives often engaged in adult group activities, mentioning that Brittany Wood was sometimes involved in these activities. Prosecutor Teresa Hines asked how often such things occurred. "It happened a bunch," she replied. A man who later pleaded guilty testified that he once participated in a 6-way inappropriate encounter with a group of relatives, including the girl and Wendy Holland. Brittany Wood's 23-year-old brother Derek Wood pleaded guilty to engaging in inappropriate activities with the victim in Wendy Holland's case. He mentioned that he had such inappropriate interactions with Wendy too many times to count, starting at around the age of 13. Received youthful offender status for his case, which was sealed, and he spent 3 years incarcerated. Brittany's mother, Chessie Wood, who also faced charges related to a child abuse crime, arrived at court with her son, but was not allowed inside as she is a defendant in a related case. Moreover, she directly stated that her family members were guilty. Wendy Holland's brother-in-law, Dustin Kent, testified that he took part in a 6-way inappropriate encounter involving Wendy, the alleged teen victim, and his wife, Mindy Kent, who is Wendy Holland's twin sister. Dustin Kent, who also pleaded guilty to sex charges, stated he first witnessed Wendy Holland engaging in inappropriate activities with the alleged victim in October 2011. A week after entering a guilty plea, Dustin Kent pleaded guilty again in Mobile County, this time for charges of sodomy and assault related to engaging in inappropriate activities with 2 different 13-year-old family members in 2008. He was sentenced to 17 years in prison. Subsequently, Randall Scott Wood, another uncle of Brittany, entered a guilty plea in Mobile County. In succession, each of the accused individuals was convicted on charges related to child abuse. Mindy Kent, Wendy's identical twin sister, also landed behind bars after Mobile County jurors convicted her of sodomy and abuse of a child under the age of 12 in 2015. She was sentenced to a maximum sentence of 40 years behind bars, 20 years for each count against her. In 2015, Wendy Holland was convicted of child abuse and child torture, receiving a staggering sentence of 219 years in prison. Brittany's mother, Chessie Wood, also admitted guilt to a misdemeanor charge and child endangerment. The conclusion of Donnie Holland's death as a suicide continues to be shrouded in controversy. The significant question of whether Brittany was the perpetrator remains unanswered definitively. However, beneath this veil, one certainty prevails. The troubled family of Brittany would face the consequences they deserved after concealing these taboo activities for ages, just as ultimately had prevailed. Now, concerning the disappearance or the night of the murder, only one person can tell us the truth: Brittany Wood herself. However, more than a decade has passed and she remains elusive with her whereabouts still unknown. So what do you think about this disturbing case? What could have happened on the night of Donnie's death? Was it really a disappearance and a suicide? Or was there something more twisted? Let us know your opinions. We'd love to hear from you. Tragically, on January 13, 1972, 9-year-old Debbie Lynn Randall, a young third grader in Marietta, Georgia, vanished on her way home from a nearby laundromat. Her disappearance sparked a massive upsurge that involved thousands of people, but it ended in sadness. Debbie's body was found 16 days later, on January 29, 1972, and it was discovered that she had been tragically attacked and strangled. After decades of being unsolved, this case saw a breakthrough in 2023. With a population of almost 61,000, Marietta, Georgia is a significant city in Cobb County and a part of the Atlanta metropolitan area. Its roots are deeply ingrained in history, dating back to the early settlers in the area that is now Kennesaw, the Cherokee town of Big Shandy. The historic Marietta Square, located in the center of the city, is a symbol of its illustrious past. Marietta, well known for its monumental chicken structure, a landmark since 1963, combines old-world charm with contemporary suburban living. It is ideally situated between Kennesaw and Smyrna, and major routes like Interstate 75 State Route 3, and U.S. Route 41 provide good access to it. Despite its many positive features, the city is not immune to crime. As evidenced by the recent resolution of the Debbie Lynn Randall cold case in 2023. John Randall and Joanna DeWheeler Randall were delighted to welcome Debbie Lynn Randall into the world on August 21, 1962, in the sleepy Georgian town of Marietta. Debbie was a third grader at Pine Forest Elementary School when she was a child in the year 1972. Her kind and compassionate disposition soon won her over as a favor among her peers, both at school and in the neighborhood. Debbie was adored and renowned for her kind disposition. Debbie had a charming personality as evidenced by the warmth and love that were frequently present in her home. Guests showed their affection for her by bringing dolls for her on a regular basis. These dolls represented the affection of the community for her and were more than just toys. Debbie had a unique relationship with her elder brother Melvin Randall at home. Their bond as siblings was close-knit and compassionate. As Debbie's caring and protective older brother, Melvin always makes an effort to grant her wishes. Their family's close-knit dynamics were demonstrated by this bond. Debbie's life, which was filled with hopes and youthful aspirations, was tragically cut short, leaving her family and community grieving greatly. On January 13, 1972, the Randall family in Marietta seemed to be enjoying just another evening. Debbie, a lively little child, was with her mother, Joan Nita, and her brother Melvin was in bed because he was sick. Joan Nita was in the kitchen making dinner while she waited for John Debbie's father to return. The evening went on as usual. Debbie asked permission to play at the neighborhood playground that evening, as she usually did. It is a short walk from their house and a known and secure area. Debbie happily agreed, promising to return before supper, when Juanita asked her to pick up some washing powder from the laundromat across the street. Debbie's regular routine included a 5-minute stroll to the playground, where she would typically spend an hour playing after school. In roughly 1.5 hours, Juanita anticipated her return. But as time went on and Debbie did not come back, anxiety began to grow. Debbie never missed her curfew, and she never arrived late without telling her. Joanna's anxiety increased as the evening went on and Debbie was still nowhere to be found. Around 9:45 p.m., John arrived home, but they still did not know Debbie's whereabouts. When they realized that this was not at all like Debbie, their concern turned to panic. Melvin joined the search even though he was not feeling well. The family acted quickly. Normally the center of activity, the neighborhood was now the focus of an increasing amount of concern. Melvin went around asking people if they had seen Debbie, but nobody knew anything about her other than the fact that she had left the house earlier. Jemina and John hurried to the closed laundromat after discovering the playground was empty. The streets were deserted, and the loss of their daughter made each minute feel more burdensome. Their concerns were heightened when they found a box of washing powder on the road close to their house, a stark reminder that something was wrong. Refusing to cry and motivated by maternal instinct, Juanita made the decision to call the police. Nevertheless, they had to deal with the formal obstacle that Debbie had vanished in less than 24 hours, which prevented them from filing an official missing persons report at that time. The police reassured them that they would make every effort to find Debbie in spite of this. The Randall family received support and assistance in their search from the community as a whole. Approximately 4,000 volunteers, among them Debbie's brother Melvin, canvassed the city in the days that followed. The streets were covered in flyers with Debbie's picture on them and a request for her safe return. The local police were equally dedicated and followed up on every lead. Debbie had picked up the washing powder, as the laundromat confirmed, but it was still unclear what transpired in the short time between her visit and her disappearance. Although Debbie's immediate neighborhood friends were questioned during the search, none of them were able to provide information about her whereabouts. The Randall family and the community held on to hope as the days stretched into weeks, knowing that it would soon run out. On January 29, 1972, 16 agonizing days later, a group of Southern Tech students who had been assiduously helping the police made an extremely painful discovery. Debbie's body was discovered off Johnson Ferry Road in a wooded area. It was a grim scene, with her half-clothed body showing signs of a violent struggle. as though she had battled mightily to survive. It appeared that the murderer had muffled Debbie's screams for assistance with her own coat. The revelation provided a horrifying glimpse into the suffering Debbie had to go through. It seemed as though the offender had been pursuing her and waiting for the right opportunity to kidnap her. This vicious person made Debbie endure horrific experiences in multiple places before disposing of her body in the woods. The community, once unified and resolved in hope, was now brought together in grief. Marietta was rocked by shock when word of the tragic discovery of Debbie's body reached the community. The sight of their dead daughter's body struck Juanita and John Randall like a ton of bricks, turning their terrible nightmare into a terrible reality. Everyone who knew Debbie will always bear a profound wound from her passing. Debbie was a cherished daughter, sister, and friend. As the Randall family struggled to understand the terrible fate that had befallen little Debbie, the community grieved with them. The inquiry into Debbie Lynn Randall's death grew more intense after her body was tragically found. Examining the scene, the coroner found disturbing details. Debbie was severely injured as evidenced by the deep wounds on her body from being strangled and beaten. During this examination, a crucial finding was an unidentified hair strand that might have belonged to her attack. This discovery suggested a potential development in the case, but one major obstacle in the 1970s was the limitations of medical technology. Since such evidence analysis was still in its infancy, the hair sample offered more of a hope for the future than a quick fix. The hair was preserved with great care, hoping that one day new technological developments would help identify Debbie's killer. Detectives followed hundreds of leads over the course of days and months, all of which ended in dead ends despite the lead's initial promise. Law enforcement put in a lot of effort, but they were caught in a frustrating loop and could not find the key clues that would have solved the case. The Randall family was left with unanswered questions as a result of the protracted uncertainty and lack of closure. They wondered what had really happened that fateful evening and who was to blame for their daughter's premature death. They had to deal with the pain of losing their dear Debbie, as well as the never-ending annoyance that justice was still evasive. Debbie's case progressively moved from an active investigation to a cold case as the years went by and the number of leads decreased. Her murder mystery remained unsolved for almost 28 years, causing constant suffering and intrigue. The Marietta community and the Randall family were left to ponder whether the truth about Debbie's terrible demise would ever be revealed. The case, which left many who knew and loved Debbie with unsolved questions and unfulfilled justice, lingered in their collective memories. But in 2001, there was a renewed interest in the unsolved mystery surrounding Debbie Lynn Randall's case. Re-examining old files, Detective Morris Nix was unable to escape the haunting memory of unsolved cases. That included Debbie's case, where he sensed details that the 1972 original investigation had overlooked. Detective Morris reopened the case because he was determined to find answers. He found the long-stowed evidence box and the hair strand that had been preserved from the crime scene. The case was put on hold while future technological advancements were made because, despite the FBI's best efforts, the hair's owner could not be identified using the advanced technology of the early 2000s. Until 2015, when Detective Morris joined the Cobb County Cold Case Unit, the case remained unresolved. The case took on new life and increased momentum thanks to modern medical science. Sandra Walker was one of the children who played with Debbie that fateful evening, and media coverage helped bring her to light. Sandra's testimony, which had previously been suppressed out of fear, gave the case a terrifying new angle. Years later, the horrific details of her experience seeing Debbie kidnapped were still fresh in her mind. Police partnered with Amanda Wood, a freelance artist, and a graphic designer to engage the community in job memorials. Wood devoted months to putting Debbie's final moments into graphic form. The result is a moving and intense depiction that highlights both Debbie's innocence and the horrific nature of her attack. Debbie's father John held on to every article from the newspaper detailing his daughter's disappearance, a continual reminder of the mystery left unsolved. Detective Morris, in the meantime, sent a piece of cloth with floral prints found on Debbie's body to the Sorensen Forensic Lab so that it could be tested for DNA. Thanks to technological developments, a partial DNA profile of an unidentified man could be created. Despite obstacles, Renewed DNA testing provided fresh opportunities for the investigation in 2019 thanks to additional funding from the Criminal Justice Coordination Council. Previously unmoving, the case now might lead to the answers the Randall family and the Marietta community have been looking for many years. Thanks to developments in genetic genealogy, Debbie Lynn Randall's cold case made a significant breakthrough in 2023. The police set out to create an SMP, a single nucleotide polymorphism profile, in cooperation with DNA Labs International. This was due to the fact that preliminary efforts such as evidence analysis and searches in the Combined DNA Indexing System, or CODIS, did not yield any results. Compared to conventional techniques, the TESNP profile offers a more thorough and insightful kind of genetic profiling. It required a painstaking process of looking through police files and public records. Their objective was to locate a DNA match for a person connected to the case. After finding a match, the detectives got to work creating an intricate family tree. They tried to track down as many of the suspected attackers' relatives as they could, a move that showed how police work and community involvement are always changing. The relatives of the named suspect were contacted by the police. Surprisingly, the family members cooperated and voluntarily gave samples of their DNA for analysis. This was a critical point in the investigation that demonstrated the ability of community collaboration to solve enduring mysteries. Following all required testing was a clear match between the DNA evidence taken from the crime scene. The killer was identified as William B. Rose, a resident of Mableton, for the Randall family and the Marietta community, who had been waiting more than 50 years for answers. This revelation was a warish moment. Born in 1950, William B. Rose is still somewhat of a mystery because so little is known about his upbringing, parents, and career. He kidnapped and murdered Debbie Randall at the age of 22. His life took a tragic turn. In 2023, authorities searched for Rose in an attempt to capture him. But in an unexpected turn of events, they discovered something they had not anticipated. Rose committed suicide in 1974, 2 years after his horrific murder of Debbie, because he was obsessed with avoiding being apprehended by the authorities. Even at the time of a prior arrest for an incident involving alcohol, this fear was apparent. Rose never made an appearance on the police radar during the first investigation, so it was shocking to learn that he was Debbie's killer. Given that Rose and Debbie's family shared an apartment building, it is possible that Rose saw Debbie at the neighborhood playground, where he was laying the groundwork for his evil scheme. When the police exhumed Rose's body in 2023 to establish his identity as the culprit, tests unequivocally identified him as the one who had tragically taken Debbie Randall's life. Debbie Lynn Randall's long-running case came to a bittersweet conclusion with the identification of William B. Rose as the culprit. Sadly, Juanita and John Randall, Debbie's parents, died before this information was found. After a fight with leukemia, Juanita passed away in 2018 and John in 2022. They had to bear the grief of losing Debbie at such a young age for decades. Debbie's brother, Melvin, conveyed his relief and appreciation. Morris Nix, a retired detective, said that technology was vital to the case's resolution. The Carriega family, comprising of 43-year-old John Derek Johnny Carriega, 37-year-old Crystal Lynn Carriega, and their 2 teenagers, 16-year-old Jonathan Felipe Higgins and 16-year-old Hunter Evan Shop, lived together in Kitsap County, Washington. John and Crystal tied the knot in 2009, blending their families with the 2 teenagers coming from previous relationships. However, their happiness didn't last long, and their 8 years together as a family were about to come to an end when an unexpected visitor changed everything. January 27, 2017 was just another typical Friday in Kitsap County, Washington. As evening came down, the Carriega family gathered in their home on West Tenino Drive, a charming single-story ranch house. Crystal reportedly had some friends over at the residence. Meanwhile, Johnny received a phone call while at the house and went out to meet someone, telling the family that he would return home shortly. Johnny later returned to the premises but did not enter the house. Like any ordinary family, they spent the night snacking, indulging in late-night activities such as scrolling through their phones or watching TV. However, the tranquility of the evening was shattered when on that fateful Friday night, dispatchers at Kitsap County received a harrowing 911 call from 16-year-old Hunter Shop. In a desperate plea, he urged authorities to rush to their location. By the time the rescue team arrived, a grim scene awaited them at the Cariaga residence. The whole family, including Hunter Shop, had been shot and killed within the confines of their home, which was subsequently set in flames. On Sunday morning, January 29, 2017, the community woke up to a chilling headline. 3 people found dead in Kitsap County home after fire. The news sent shockwaves through the area, with residents grappling to make sense of the tragedy that had unfolded. The newspapers had this wrong headline, "Homeowner Missing." This added another layer of concern and uncertainty to the already disturbing situation. According to the initial reports, the victims, 2 teenagers and a woman, had been discovered inside a home engulfed in flames. Authorities confirmed that the deaths were classified as homicides, leaving the community reeling from the shock of such a violent and senseless crime. It was confirmed that the crime had taken place the previous Friday night, with no sign of the homeowner, John. Concerned authorities urged the public to remain vigilant and report any sightings of Cariaga or his truck, a brown 2005 Ford F-150. Despite being labeled as a missing person, suspicions began to swirl around John, with some suspecting he may have been involved in the heinous crime. Now, the press played a pivotal role in shaping public perception, with headlines fueling speculation and uncertainty. The mention of "someone's here with a gun" only added to the air of suspicion surrounding Cariaga. However, it soon became apparent that the media had made a grave error in reporting the survival of 16-year-old Hunter Shop, who had made the distressing 911 call before tragically succumbing to his injuries. As authorities continued their investigation, some surprising details emerged, shedding light on the cruelty of the crime. Shell casings, predominantly 9mm, were discovered on the back deck, and more than $50,000 was found in cash hidden in a strongbox in the main bedroom, along with another $7,000 in a money bag. Throughout the next few days, law enforcement spared no effort in their search for Johnny Cariaga and his truck, mobilizing every available resource in a desperate bid for clues. Eventually, a crucial development rocked the ongoing investigation. The discovery of John Cariaga's truck, the burnt wreckage containing the lifeless body of Johnny, was found on a remote road in North Mason County. The discovery was made by a passerby walking in the area, prompting immediate action from authorities. The announcement from the Kitsap County Sheriff's Office sought assistance from residents in the area, urging anyone with information to come forward. Crime scene investigators carefully searched the area, scouring for clues that might shed light on the circumstances surrounding John's death. Their efforts brought out a crucial piece of evidence: a single latex glove found near the burnt-out truck. Now this discovery raised questions and fueled speculation, prompting authorities to appeal to residents and businesses with security cameras for any footage that might provide valuable insights into the case. Sheriff's Detective Lieutenant Earl Smith emphasized the importance of video evidence, urging those with relevant footage to cooperate with law enforcement. The appeal was met with a swift response from the community, with individuals stepping forward to offer assistance in any way they could. Despite the collaborative spirit permeating the investigation, details surrounding the circumstances of John's death remain shrouded in mystery. According to detectives, the road leading to the tree farm, marked by a gate, showed signs of forceful entry, with the gate visibly damaged. It appeared as though Johnny's truck had rammed through the gate, which was a stark indication of some level of struggle. Amidst the chaos and uncertainty, the memory of Hunter's shop weighed heavily on the minds of many. Principal Megan Swiecki of North Kitsap High School delivered the somber news, paying tribute to Hunter's memory and urging those who knew him to cherish the moments they shared. As the community mourned the loss of the Cariaga family, a sense of hope emerged. The appointment of Detective Elizabeth Lisa Gundrum in this case. With a major lack of definitive evidence and any eyewitnesses, investigators turned to digging to the lives of the victims. As the investigators started to, they uncovered a series of puzzling yet potential motives. These were basically speculations about the family's business ventures and financial dealings, fueling theories of possible illicit activities and criminal connections. The first thing, the disturbing 911 call made by one of the victims, struck a question. Why didn't Hunter mention anything about the fire, or was he confused? This raised suspicions about the timing and motives behind the arson, adding another layer of complexity to an already confusing investigation. As the investigation progressed, authorities faced a ton of questions and uncertainties. The motive behind the attack, the identity of the person or persons, and the circumstances surrounding John Carriega's abduction remain shrouded. Amidst the confusion and despair, one question loomed larger than all others. Why? Months passed with little progress. However, in February 2017, a breakthrough occurred when surveillance footage captured John Carriega at a local grocery store buying cigarettes, seemingly behaving normally in the hours leading up to his disappearance. While this provided some insight into his whereabouts, it failed to yield any significant leads. Then, in June 2017, authorities released a photo of a person of interest captured on surveillance footage at a Target store just days before the murders. The image showed an individual entering the store, raising suspicions about their potential involvement in the crime. This marked the first communication from authorities in months, highlighting the urgency of the investigation. Sheriff Gary Simpson emphasized the need for public assistance, confirming that more than one person was involved in the meticulously planned murders. This added a new layer of complexity to the case, prompting hints about the suspect's motives and connections to the victims. The request for information on the unknown suspect seen at Target 12 days before the murders raised questions about their possible purchases and their relevance to the crime. Could items bought at the store be linked to the murders, such as firearms or materials found at the crime scene? In September 2017, the investigation progressed with the identification of a person of interest, Danny Kelly Jr. Danny was a longtime friend of Johnny's, even turned out to be Johnny's best man at the time of his wedding. Now reports suggested a troubling encounter between Danny and his estranged mother, who accused him of misconduct. The case report was that he had repeatedly groped and propositioned his mother and was arrested on behalf of this case. Besides, the alleged involvement in the Carriaga case raised eyebrows, but authorities clarified that he had not been officially charged in connection with the homicides. Now the year of 2017 drew to a close, marking the Carriega family murders as the most significant local news story of the year. The community's deep-seated feelings were further pushed by an anonymous donor who chose to contribute $16,000 to Crime Stoppers, bolstering the reward fund to $20,000. Despite the dropped charges against Danny J. Kelly Jr. for assaulting his mother, investigators remained committed to pursuing leads in the case. On January 11, 2018, authorities released an extended version of Hunter Shop's chilling 911 call, as the investigators weren't letting down on the case. They came to notice that Danny was wearing Bandito's motorcycle club attire in the video, and the investigators appealed to members of the motorcycle club for information. Now this marked a significant development, as investigators publicly identified Danny Kelly Jr. as a person of interest and highlighted his association with the Banditos Motorcycle Club. For those who aren't aware, the Banditos Motorcycle Club is widely recognized as a motorcycle gang by law enforcement and intelligence agencies across multiple countries. Although the club has denied allegations of being a criminal organization, several members have been convicted of engaging in illegal activities. It has a substantial presence in Washington state and has been the target of various law enforcement operations over the years. According to the Department of Justice, Banditos members have been heavily involved in methamphetamine trafficking and various violent crimes in Washington. Further scrutiny focused on surveillance footage showing Johnny Carriega meeting someone at a local grocery store shortly before the murders. In January of 2020, authorities once again pressed the importance of their belief that members of the Banditos Motorcycle Club were directly involved in the Carriaga family murders. They appealed to the biker community for any information that could aid in the investigation. However, since then, there had been little to no progress in the case, and it stayed the same for nearly 5 years. On further digging, detectives found out that Johnny had been involved in the transportation and distribution of for a significant period. He made numerous trips to California, where he reportedly acquired kilos of coke to distribute in Kitsap County. This involvement led him to interact with members of the Banditos Motorcycle Club, particularly Robert James Watson, the leader of the local Banditos chapter, to whom one of Johnny's close associates at the time began directly selling coke. Yes, the initial suspect, Danny J. Kelly Jr. Despite their close relationship, a falling out occurred before the murders, allegedly over money stolen by Danny. As Johnny went into distribution in Kitsap County, he came into contact with other Bandidos motorcycle club members who were in process of joining the club. Now the detectives used cell phone tracking to show the locations of Carriega and the suspects before, during, and after the killings. Danny Kelly Jr. had bought a prepaid mobile burner phone at the Silverdale Target, which he used extensively to communicate with John Carriega for the 10 days leading up to the killings. However, communication stopped afterward, even though the phone didn't expire until April 2017. Detectives obtained a search warrant in January 2020 for Robert Watson's cell phone when members of the Bandidos were suspected in the homicides. Text messages between Danny and Robert Watson, including one on January 23, 2020, were retrieved, with Danny commenting on the weather, saying, "A little humid today." On the night of the murders, the Carriega family had friends over, but Johnny abruptly left after receiving a phone call. Surveillance footage captured him briefly parked next to another vehicle in a nearby grocery store parking lot before driving off. Meanwhile, the friends departed from the Carriega home. Before Johnny could return, 3 men arrived and began shooting. Crystal, Johnny's wife, was reportedly the first victim, followed by her son, Jonathan Higgins, and then Johnny's son, Hunter Shop, who was shot in the driveway. Crystal was shot in the head, and Jonathan Higgins, who came out of his room to check on the commotion, was as well. Hunter Shop was carrying a pizza into the home when he was ambushed by at least one gunman. It appeared, based on the evidence, that he surprised the killer. A first shot missed, but he was struck by 2 subsequent shots, and Shop was left for dead. But he was still alive when he made the 911 call. The call abruptly ended, suggesting the gunman interfered with or destroyed the phone, before fatally shooting Hunter. The assailants then set fires at different ends of the home using fire starter logs and accelerants, and they threw rocks through the windows to fuel the blaze. Now, subsequently, the suspects exhibited suspicious behavior and were linked to the crime through this evidence. Danny was seen by a witness driving Johnny's truck away from the crime scene. Surveillance footage from a local Target showed Danny purchasing a prepaid phone days before the murders, which he reportedly used to communicate extensively with Johnny. Notably, the phone's activity ceased shortly before the killings. Watson visited a club member's house missing his pants and claimed he had fought with a homeless black man. Later that evening, Watson called 911 to report his truck had been broken into several days earlier, and a loaded Glock handgun and a second loaded magazine were stolen. Watson, who worked for Kitsap County Public Works, stopped going to work and was eventually fired in September 2017. Detectives found that about $303,000 was deposited into his accounts that year, with numerous cash deposits that couldn't be traced. Johnny Carriega had reportedly hidden $200,000 under his home, but it was never found. Also, a neighbor heard gunshots on the night of the homicide and saw Carriega's truck speeding down Tanino Drive. The neighbor identified the driver as Danny, whom he knew from when Danny's family lived in the same house. Following the truck was a silver car, almost bumper to bumper. Detectives noted that Danny and John Carriega had a strong dislike for each other, making Danny's presence at Carriega's house or driving his truck suspicious. Less than a week after detectives released video of Carriega's truck in the unidentified car at the Camp Union Grocery, Robert's brother Johnny Watson's car, a 2006 Mercedes, was found stripped and dumped in the Puyallup River. The vehicle was missing its plates and had not been reported stolen. However, later, Robert and his brother paid $1,500 to retrieve the car. Now there was a question. Why did he only think to report it then, the day after a quadruple murder nearby? Johnny Watson, the third individual, was believed to be the driver of the second vehicle seen in the grocery store parking lot on the night of the murders. And furthermore, the DNA from one of the rocks at the crime scene matched perfectly with his. Finally, on June 6, 2022, a significant development shook the community as 3 men were formally charged in connection with the quadruple murder of the Carriega family. This marked a crucial moment to the long-standing investigation that had gripped the region for years. The arrest operation, meticulously planned over several weeks, involved approximately 70 police officers spanning multiple counties. The suspects, identified as 43-year-old Danny J. Kelly Jr., 49-year-old Johnny James Watson, and 50-year-old Robert James Watson, were apprehended in different locations across the state. Robert Watson was caught in between traffic at Gig Harbor. Johnny Watson and Danny were arrested about an hour later in their apartments in Bremerton. Following their arrests, the three men were booked into local jails and charged with a total of 16 felonies each. These charges ranged from first-degree aggravated murder, first-degree murder, first-degree arson, to first-degree burglary. Bail for each defendant was set at a staggering $20 million. The suspects appeared in court the following morning to enter their pleas, with each pleading not guilty to the alleged felony charges. The judge ordered that they be held without bail and imposed strict conditions, prohibiting them from possessing firearms, alcohol, or drugs, as prescribed. Additionally, the defendants were forbidden from having any contact with each other as mandated by the court. In response to the Cariaga family murders, investigators had formed a specialized task force dedicated to unraveling the complexities of the quadruple homicide. This collaborative effort underscored the gravity of the case and the determination of law enforcement to bring the perpetrators to justice. The community awaited further developments in the legal proceedings, hoping that the arrests would mark a significant step towards closure for the families affected by the tragic loss of the Cariaga family. But even in this darkness, there's a glimmer of hope as people come together to remember them. The arrest of the three suspects in the Cariaga family murder case was a moment long awaited by those touched by the tragedy. For years, Carly Scott, the mother of Hunter Scott, had pleaded for justice, and finally her prayers were answered. She's made so many emotional pleas over the years, just asking for someone to step forward. And it worked. The detectives got tips from the public that helped crack the case. The suspects, accused of killing an entire family, were brought before a Kitsap County judge, visibly restrained and escorted into court. Their alleged crimes, fueled by greed, disrespect, left a deep scar on the community. During the trial, emotions ran high as family members faced the accused expressing their desire for justice. The suspects exuded an unsettling aura reflecting on the severity of their actions. Despite the pain and heartache, the arrests provided a sense of relief and closure to the victims' loved ones, and it was very much visible around the Kitsap County Sheriff's Office. As family gathered to hug detectives and each other, anxious right after the arrest. As we wrap up today's episode, we invite you to share your thoughts on this disturbing case. Your reflections are valuable to us. If you have suggestions for other stories, please feel free to share them in the comments below. June 14, 2019, around 7:30 p.m. at the Costco Wholesale in Corona, California. The French family, consisting of 32-year-old Kenneth French, his mother Paula French, and his father Russell French, were just going about their usual shopping routine. As they looked around the aisles, they came across a food sample table offering sausages. At the same table stood off-duty LAPD officer Salvador Sanchez. He was holding his 8-month-old son Noah and seemed to be a caring father interacting with his child. For reasons unknown, Kenneth French suddenly attacked Officer Sanchez. It's unclear the exact nature of the attack, but it could be described as a push, slap, punch, or some other kind of physical contact. This unexpected act caused the officer to lose his balance and fall to the ground, dropping his baby and possibly hitting his head in the process. Upon arriving at the scene, officers found Officer Sanchez visibly shaken and disoriented. Sanchez claimed he suffered a concussion from the fall, which left him disoriented and scared. In this state, he says he pulled out his gun, wanting to protect himself and his young son Noah, whom he had dropped during the fall. He admitted to firing the gun, but maintained it was an accidental discharge due to his disoriented and scared state. The sound of gunfire sent shockwaves through the store. Panic erupted as people scattered in fear, some running for the exits to escape the danger. Others, with a sense of urgency, dialed 911 for help. During the chaos, while some took shelter, a few brave people went towards the sound of the shots to see if anyone was hurt. It was during this time when they found Officer Sanchez lying on the ground. Officer Sanchez also claimed that when he regained some awareness, he saw Kenneth holding a small black pistol similar to an LCP Ruger .380 pistol. The police arrived quickly after the shooting. Officer Sanchez told them he thought he'd been shot in the head and saw a gun before getting knocked down. One customer, who had been shopping elsewhere in the store, ran towards the commotion after the shot stopped. He saw Officer Sanchez pointing toward Kenneth French, who was also injured but found no gun near him. The police too were not able to find any witnesses who saw Kenneth, his mother Paula, or his father Russell with a gun. They also couldn't find any evidence, like a dropped weapon, near where the family was shot to suggest they had one. Once everyone was safely evacuated from the store, the police took extra precautions to check everywhere for possible dangers. They even used special drone cameras to look on top of cabinets and freezers where someone might have hidden something. After a thorough investigation, it became clear there was only one gun involved in the entire incident. The handgun carried by LAPD Officer Salvador Sanchez. No other weapon was ever found. Officer Sanchez didn't seem to have any outward injuries after the shooting, but he still asked to go to the hospital. There, he told the doctors he thought he passed out after hitting his head on the floor. Based on this, they diagnosed him with a concussion, which is a kind of brain injury that can cause dizziness and confusion. However, the police reports didn't say he had any clear injuries like cuts or bruises even later on. Convinced there was more to the story than met the eye, the detectives set their sights on uncovering the family's past, believing it held the key to a complete understanding. The French family, originally from Kolkata, India, had built a life in California. Kenneth, 32, lived with his parents Russell and Paula, who had been married since 1986. They were a close-knit family who had lived in Canada and the UK before settling in Riverside. The couple raised their son Kenneth with a gentle soul and a warm smile. Kenneth, although 32 years old, had the mental capacity of a teenager due to a combination of schizophrenia and an intellectual disability. Schizophrenia is a complex mental illness that can affect a person's thoughts, emotions, and behavior. People with schizophrenia may experience hallucinations, which are seeing or hearing things that aren't there, and delusions, which are false beliefs held despite evidence to the contrary. It can be a challenging condition to manage, and Kenneth's family was dedicated to giving him the best possible care. But Kenneth's condition had been worsening over time, and he was nonverbal at the time of the incident. He had upcoming appointments to address recent concerns about fluid in his brain and the possible impact of stopping his medication due to other health issues. However, the circumstances surrounding the incident raised questions about whether Kenneth's situation could have played a role in the tragedy. To understand the full picture, it's crucial to hear from those closest to Kenneth, his parents. In the aftermath of the shooting, Kenneth's mother told responding officers that her son had hit the officer at the sample stand. However, she was understandably traumatized and her account later changed, saying it was more of a slap. Meanwhile, Officer Sanchez wasn't arrested and went home while authorities investigated. He was initially given desk duty and then placed on paid leave. In light of the ongoing investigation, Officer Sanchez was given a desk assignment until further notice. Unfortunately, the store's security footage did little to shed light on the situation. The camera was far away and blocked by merchandise, so it didn't capture the initial interaction between Kenneth and the officer. It only showed Kenneth wearing a striped shirt, being pushed away from the stand by his father. Paula briefly appears gesturing towards the officer before moving away. The footage then shows the French family backing away just before the officer fired. Authorities released this footage as the only visual evidence they had from the store. They emphasized that there was no earlier footage available and no other cameras captured the incident. This was especially shocking for a crowded store like Costco, with people walking in various directions, browsing through aisles and stopping by sample stands. With only one camera and its limited view, large sections of the store remain unseen. While the footage provided a frustratingly limited window into the event, investigators weren't ready to give up just yet. Through careful analysis, they managed to get some valuable pieces of information from the grainy frames. They determined that a mere 3.8 seconds passed between Officer Sanchez falling to the ground and opening fire. This incredibly short time frame, barely enough time to blink, raises serious questions about what happened during those critical moments. As previously mentioned, Officer Sanchez fired a total of 10 shots during the chaotic encounter. 4 of them struck Kenneth, 3 bullets ripped through his back, and another pierced his shoulder. His parents, Paula and Russell, were also caught in the line of fire. Paula was wounded in the back, and Russell lost a kidney after being shot in the abdomen. The remaining 4 bullets lodged themselves in display cases, a grim reminder of the senseless violence that erupted in the familiar aisles of Costco. While no one else was physically harmed, the emotional toll was devastating. Russell and Paula spent months in the hospital, enduring surgeries and treatment for their injuries. But for Kenneth, there was no recovery. Witnesses recounted holding his hand, feeling the warmth fade as the 32-year-old man, a man with the mental capacity of a teenager, slipped away. His gentle smile, his struggles, his life, all silenced in a mere 3.8 seconds. The loss of Kenneth on June 14, 2019, a son, a brother, and a friend cast a deep shadow on his family and the community. His absence left behind a void filled with only the echo of unanswered questions and the weight of unimaginable grief. The French family spent 2 long months in the hospital recovering from their injuries. After being discharged in July 2019, they decided to speak up about their ordeal. They hoped that by sharing their story, they could convince the Riverside County District Attorney's Office to file charges against Officer Sanchez. Facing public pressure and the family's pleas, the District Attorney's Office presented the case to a grand jury in September 2019. However, the jury ultimately decided not to charge Officer Sanchez. This decision was another crushing blow for the French family. Just 1 week after leaving the hospital and finally holding a funeral service for Kenneth, they were forced to confront this new reality. Still deeply grieving and emotionally drained, they held a press conference to express their disappointment. They believed the city of Los Angeles, where Officer Sanchez worked, shared the blame for their tragedy. Their lawsuit argued that the city had been negligent in its duty to ensure proper training for its officers. Meanwhile, Officer Sanchez's attorneys were fighting back against the charges. The attorneys maintained that the officer had acted appropriately. The legal battle didn't end there. While the local district attorney's office decided not to pursue charges, the state stepped in. In August 2021, almost 2 years after the incident, the California Attorney General's office decided to press charges against Officer Sanchez. They accused him of 1 count of manslaughter, which means causing someone's death unintentionally, along with other charges related to using a gun dangerously. If found guilty, he could face up to 30 years in prison. Although it had been 2 years since the shooting, the public, especially the neighbors, were still waiting for justice to be served. Officer Sanchez's lawyer argued against these charges, claiming they were politically motivated. Despite the earlier setback, the French family's fight for justice continued in the civil trial. This time, they were able to introduce a powerful new piece of evidence. This animated recreation filled in the crucial missing pieces that the grainy store security footage had failed to capture. The animation brought the events of that tragic day to life. It depicted the French family, Paula and Russell strolling through the aisles. Kenneth, wearing a striped shirt and jeans, walked beside them, seemingly unaware of the encounter. As they approached the sample stand, the animation showed Kenneth reaching out and striking the officer who was holding his young son. The impact sent the officer tumbling to the ground. The animation then depicted the horrifying moment when all 3 family members were struck by the officer's gunfire. In November 2021, a jury in Los Angeles decided in favor of the French family. The legal battles surrounding the Costco shooting continued for years. On December 27, 2023, a trial was held at Larson Justice Center in Indio to determine whether former Officer Sanchez was criminally responsible for the shooting. The jury deliberated for about 3 weeks, but ultimately deadlocked, unable to reach a verdict. The judge declared a mistrial. This heartbreaking case paints a picture of tragedy on all sides. Kenneth French, a gentle soul with a mental disability, lost his life in a senseless act of violence. On the other side of the gun, a father and police officer, Salvador Sanchez, acted in what he believed was necessary to protect himself and his young son. His actions that day have undoubtedly haunted him and his family, leaving a stain on his career and reputation. This case leaves us with many unanswered questions and an intense sense of unease. It raises debates about police training, mental health awareness, and the limits of self-defense. What do you think about this case? Did the outcome deliver justice? Was compassion considered? Should Officer Sanchez have been held accountable? Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.